Hey everybody, we're Shyam and Chris, and this is Fan Team Radio.
And we're back with another special episode with special guest Sam joining us one more time after the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. I wouldn't say it was as fantastic as maybe the 2021 Grand Prix with the chaos of Verstappen crashing and then brake magic chaos with Hamilton, but pretty good race overall. What do you think?
I would say if you were, at least so far, if you were going to watch one race this season, this is the race to watch. I thought it was full of drama, full of on-track action, and one of the best things that we got to see was you really get a sense of what Formula One is all about when a lot of the teams are finally within striking distance of each other, and it really brought me back into what Formula One is supposed to be and how good it really is when you have a lot of close contenders on track with cars that are of similar capability.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I kind of had this thought even right before we jumped on about I kind of wish all of these cars had been this way since race number one because the insanity that would be. I mean, the championship's already super close, like not as close as it could be, but there's three or four people within striking distance. Like mathematically, I don't even think Oscar is out of the picture if Max were to have multiple DNFs. Like, and if this had been this way since race number one, it would have been probably one of the craziest and best seasons ever. And it's shaping up to be that anyways. But it's fantastic, and we're getting to see multiple race winners. All these different situations play out very track dependent, depending on who's Ferraris look terrible one week, then they're dominating another week. Mercedes, destroy a couple races in a row, then go back to being nowhere. Red Bull was like, we were looking at another season like last year where they won all but one race. And that, what has it been 7 or 8 races since Max has won a race? Like, it's insanity to think that that's the case. But here we are, and we have 7 races left, and it's going to be a doozy.
I know, and it finally feels like watching a horse race where people are just jockeying for position every single race, every single corner. It's very cool, and I think, look, a lot can be said about Verstappen having won so much and being so dominant in the beginning of the season. Putting him far enough ahead where I think, look, anything could happen. I kind of think he might still just squeak by with the championship. But if this is what next year is going to look like, then next year is going to be absolutely bonkers, especially with Hamilton going to Ferrari and Kimi Antonelli coming into Mercedes. I think he's going to have to get up to speed a little bit, but I think it's, like you finally, whatever is happening to have these regulations and all of the cars catch up to each other, it's sort of setting next year up for a pretty crazy season. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say, never, because we said that at the beginning of this season that it was just going to be the Max Verstappen show. But I actually think that maybe next season might be worse, only because it looks like Red Bull's having a disastrous moment and on the down low, especially with Newey leaving and going to Aston Martin. And there seems to be more drama going on there. Then we have an absolute rookie coming into Mercedes. And even if Kimi was the next coming of Max Verstappen, so is Oscar, so is Leclerc, so is Max. Like, everyone at the top of F1 is a version of that. And so I think it's potentially possible we're going to get Ferrari versus McLaren next year, which I'll still be excited to see because I'm happy to have Piastri win a first championship. I'm happy to have Leclerc or Lewis win his eighth. Like, it would be a fantastic season. And then, you never can count out Max. But never say never, because anything can happen in this sport, and we've seen that multiple times over. But either way, it'll be an exciting season. But I'm definitely excited to see this, how this Piastri versus Norris situation is going to play out, not only for the rest of this year, but next year as well. Because if that yellow flag hadn't happened in qualification, this would have been a very different race from like a team order standpoint, from a Oscar versus Lando standpoint. So I'm curious, like, do you think it would have played out similarly? Like, do you think they're still going to continue to back Norris for the last 7 races, even if Oscar's performing better? It's an interesting predicament to have as McLaren.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is they almost got. I don't want to say they got lucky that happened to Norris, because obviously it's very unlucky. I think at the end of the day, they still need to back Norris. Like, Piastri is great, and he's doing an incredible job. I think he certainly can pick up where Norris, um, you know, where Norris falls through the cracks. Like, he just got really unlucky this race, and Piastri ended up coming out ahead. But I think they should still back Norris in the event that they are together on track. And I think, look, Piastri is an amazing driver, and I think he will certainly have his time. And unless there's like a big discrepancy between their speed, and it's a situation like in I'm totally blanking on the race, but if there's another situation where Norris just can't keep up and is behind, then I think it looks a little fishy. But at the same time, Norris is closer to Max in the championship. And if they have a way of winning both championships, I think that they absolutely should. And I said this the last time I was on the podcast, like, Michael Schumacher had in his contract that they had to back him. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case as much with Norris, but I don't know that I see it as huge of a problem. And I'm actually surprised that Norris was not faster to say, yeah, like, I think they should prioritize me. That's why I'm on this team. They've, like, I've signed with this team so that we could, like, build this together. And yes, Piastri's having some great races and he's on an incredible run of form, but this is my team. He basically came out and said, like, I'm not here to be given races, which, it's a double-edged sword. I agree with what he's saying, but at the same time, like, it's Formula One, and you need to be ruthless in every way possible, like on track, off track. Like, if you are there to win and you can bank a win in some form, and it will get you and the team closer to the championship, I think that they need to, at least for this year, back him until the start of next year, where hopefully they're both doing well, and then they can really see who, they can kind of like have it play out a little better. And if they're close in the championship, then let them race. But if, like, one is a lot further ahead in the championship, I think they need to back whoever that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a situation that kind of sprung up on Lando and McLaren, where they kind of weren't expecting to be in this position to have to make these decisions, uh, just because Red Bull was so dominant in the first half of the season, and now that's kind of reversed. And if you've never been in that position before, where all of a sudden you're like within striking distance of the championship, I think Lando was just trying to be cool about it and be like, like, have McLaren make the decision for me so I don't look like a douche. But at the same time, you know, uh, why am I blanking on his name? Lewis's old teammate.
Oh, Valtteri Bottas.
No, 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 no. The Lewis's old teammate that they championship battle. He's now an
Oh,
announcer.
Nico Rosberg.
Yeah, then Nico, I know that guy so well, and I've just completely brain farted
Yeah.
on his name. But when, as Nico Rosberg said in the interview, that like these chances just don't come around. Like you could never be in this position again, so you have to go for it. And so like you said, he has to be ruthless, and they have to make those decisions early on, because there's at least 15 points that Lando has left on the table, potentially more. Even though he did a lot of really good damage control in this race, 15th to 4th, while also passing Max, and I think on lap 49. And subsequently, this crash that happened that we'll talk about in a minute, prevented Max from taking that fastest lap, which might end up being very huge in this championship race. But, I think the next few races are going to be hugely telling on if this is actually going to be possible or not. Singapore was disastrous for Red Bull last year. It was the only race that Red Bull didn't win last year. I don't know if it'll be as disastrous this year. We'll see, but it's very possible. And it's very possible that McLaren could win two that races, or Sainz won it last year, so maybe Leclerc will win it this year. We'll see. Man, Leclerc is close too. He's only at 235. This is going to be a really crazy end of the season. But yeah, back to your point, like Lando really needs to become a lion basically, and just be ruthless and try to win this championship. Otherwise, somebody else is going to do it. Or, as I said earlier on in the season, Max is going to get by because people are just going to trade wins back and forth, and he's just going to eke out, like you said.
Yeah, and that's kind of that's kind of my suspicion of what's going to happen. My hope is that Lando can get really close, and maybe in like the last couple of races it'll be decided. But look, you have Mercedes win a couple times, you have McLaren win a couple times, you have Ferrari win a couple times. And while, you know, everyone can hop on board and say, "Oh my God, Red Bull is a disaster and Max isn't." Max isn't performing. He's still kind of performing enough where he could squeak. Like obviously it's not ideal, but he could squeak by if everyone keeps trading wins at the front. And especially if Norris isn't necessarily prioritized like they need him to be, then I think he could end up just squeaking by however, it's like the 7 points that Lando should have had or whatever it is. But I also think it's not just race wins. Like it's, if Lando's in third and Piastri's in second, like they got to swap the cars. If Piastri's in, like they need all the points that they can get. And if they want to actually fight for the driver's title, like they just need to get their shit together and help Lando out. And I think
Yeah.
they need to also, like if Lando qualifies ahead of Piastri again, I think they need to do what they kind of almost did in the beginning of Monza, where they really worked as a team, and Piastri did an incredible job, blocking basically. And I think they easily could have 1-2'd that race had Piastri not made that move. And I think they just need to say, like, we get it. I promise your time is coming. Like, if that situation arises again, like, block and let Lando go. Like, let's do this.
I mean, yeah, if I was Piastri, I'd be like, yeah, I'll take these last few races, and next season you back me. If it's 50-50, next season you back me. But let's talk about Max, because uncharacteristically, even though he DNF'd, this was the first race in a long time that Sergio seemed to, on pure merit, outperform Max on the track. Not only that, this might be the first time, and I could very well be wrong, but this might be the first time without having damage, or some other situation happen where Max actually lost positions. Technically, he gained a position, but without the two crashing out, he would have qualified in P6 and ended P7. Ultimately ended up in P5 because we lost two drivers, but it seemed like Sergio was able to keep pace. There was a couple laps where it was Piastri, Leclerc, and Sergio very close to each other. And for most of the race, Sergio was in contention to win. Had something happened, he was at least within podium guaranteed. And Max seemed to be struggling. Was passed by Russell on track, and it just didn't seem like Max. I don't know if the setup was wrong or what, but it just didn't feel like traditional Max Verstappen. So I was just curious what you think is kind of happening there. And if it's like a mental thing or just a setup thing or what, but it was definitely weird to see Max just like out of his element.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is exactly what you just said. It's really Max being out of his element and not really understanding what's happening with the car. And I still think he gives much better feedback than most drivers when they're trying to, when they're in practice and trying to figure it out. But he's again, you sort of, and this isn't just Max's with all drivers. I think when they're in the bad situations where they just can't figure out the car, they just get to like this very childish place where everything is wrong, there aren't any solutions, and you kind of are just in a bad headspace. And it almost seemed like, I think he's always going to drive hard, but it kind of seemed like he was like, this car is crap, I'm just going to drive it around as best I can, but I'm not really going to fight. I'm not going to get into it with anyone. It's also hard because on uh, Baku, where there's such a long straight, there's not like there's only so much defending you can do if someone gets the run up to you, earlier on in that straight. Obviously, there is defense that you can do when someone's about to pass you at the end, as we've seen with Piastri and Leclerc. But it just seemed like he's kind of like threw his hands up and was just like, okay, I'm just going to drive this car and like I'll finish where I finish. And I think that's also a testament to like where he is in the championship lead. And while it's slowly going away, I don't know that he's overly concerned yet to the point where it's like a real motivation for him to be like, oh my God, like I'm not letting anyone through. So I don't know. It definitely, it feels very topsy-turvy.
I mean, listen, I'm not Max and I'm not, uh, an F1 driver at the top of his game, but there's part of me that feels like Max is not like over the sport because obviously he loves cars, he loves racing in any shape form, but like I think he's the whatever drama that's happened at Red Bull, watching the the dynasty that he helped build, with Adrian and everything going on, all the drama that happened with Red Bull and the team just kind of sort of falling apart and all this talk about Toto wanting him, and now everyone's talking about him going to Aston. I think maybe he's just like a little bit lost about like who am I driving for, what am I driving for, and maybe he's just lost a little bit of this like I'm tired of this drama. But obviously he still wants to win the championship. But I think Max as a so like last year he was winning every race and he was still fighting to win every race even after he had the championship locked up. Like it was so important to him, and I just don't feel that at the moment. And that's because I think like everything is just kind of going to shit, and the car is going to shit. And I'm sure he'll take the championship if he gets it. But there's part of me that feels like maybe he doesn't want it if he loses 18 race or 10, 12, 14, 15 races in a row, because that would just feel like, man, you guys lost it instead of me winning it. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But it was just so interesting to see Sergio perform. Unfortunately, he got. I think he took himself out. I'm curious about your thoughts on that, but um,
Yeah, I do feel really bad for him. He drove an incredible race. I would say it was a little bit 50-50 for me. I definitely don't think it was a situation where I was like, oh my God, Sergio, you you were doing so well in this race and then you made a really stupid move, like it's wholly on you, and like that, that again proves that you shouldn't be in that seat. I don't think it was that bad. I think it was like a little bit of misjudgment, couple, like I don't know. I guess I just felt like it was more of a racing incident, but I also think that you have to know that he's probably not gonna let you by, and like of course I think if he backed off, he probably would have gotten him the next time around on the straight, because there was one more lap left. Yeah, there was one more lap left, or two more laps. And I think he just got a little impatient, but I didn't feel like it was a crazy dive bomb of desperation.
Yep.
So I ended up just kind of feeling bad for him, because it was, like it was a pretty spectacular race, and I hope he doesn't feel dejected again. Like I hope he comes back and feels that he did race a great race, and it doesn't sort of put him back in his hole.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like Christian is already sort of backing him a little bit. He drove a great race. They defended him, and Christian came out and started talking about the initial mistakes that they've made with the car started around Barcelona, which is when Sergio started having trouble with their floor changes, and that was their first fundamental mistake. So, in saying that their driving styles are so different, Max and Sergio, that Sergio's issues with the car were like exacerbated, and that's why he's been performing so bad. So Christian's trying to take a little bit of blame from the technical side for Sergio's performance, and I think trying to defend his like great performance in this race, saying like, "See that we are backing him, and he is a good driver, and this kind of proves it." So I don't think he should feel that dejected. And, the FAA agrees with you that it was closer to 50-50. I think it was a little bit more 80-20, just because Sergio seemed to crash in the way that I crash in in the video game, which is like I have a lot of room to my left, and I'm like, I don't care, I'm fighting you anyways, and oh crap, I'm in the wall. Um, because Carlos was a little bit ahead, and Sergio did have a lot of room on his left, and so just avoid the crash, and like you said, get him on the straight. But um, overall, an interesting race that led to kind of the unfortunate outcome where, for Red Bull at least, where now McLaren has greatly overtaken them in constructors, just because Sergio missed out on all those points. But if it's a sign for things to come in the next few races, it'll be a good close race to the end there. But let's talk a little bit about these newcomers that came in. It's Mr. Colapinto's second race, and yeah, he's already scored more points than Logan Sargent.
What else
After
is there to say? He
I
has
like,
4 times the points in 2 races than Logan Sargent has had in 2 seasons.
and not only that, if everyone recalls, Logan Sargent got his single point in a race where like 25% of the cars crashed out. I forget how many people actually DNF, but it was quite a lot, earning Logan his first point. And yeah, this kid's come in and kind of, you know, it goes to show you that Formula One has a deep, deep, deep talent pool across, F2 and other racing categories, that there's probably a lot of guys who will never get their shot. Um, and they might deserve to. We have guys like Lance Stroll sitting in the seats permanently and stuff like that. And we might never get to see the next Franco Colapinto, but we've had Liam Lawson, we've had Franco, Ollie Behrman got his shot because of appendicitis. And these young kids are showing up. Behrman scored points in this race. Colapinto did too. So it kind of sucks that at the moment Franco doesn't have a seat for next year. But yeah, like you said, there's not much else to say. But curious about your thoughts overall on these rookies coming in and scoring points right off the bat, and you know, you think he'll find his way to get a seat next year? There's only 2 seats left, and uh, I don't know who they're going to go to, but
Yeah, I mean it's always really cool to see young talent come in and do as well as well as they do, and it's always hit or miss. Like they could do well in one race and then not well in another race. And I think one of the things that is contributing to Colapinto's form is he doesn't really have anything to lose. He obviously wants to make as good of an impression as possible, but he knows that he's not in that particular seat next year, so he doesn't um he's not necessarily trying to like impress that team specifically. And so I think my hope is that that contributes to like some level of calm. And I don't know exactly where he would go. I mean, there's that second Sauber slash Audi seat, and then there's the RB seat. But I don't know. I like my hope is that he continues on this form, and if he keeps scoring points in a Williams, then I think both of those teams have to consider him at least. And maybe someone will take, because he's a development driver right now, so maybe someone will take him as like their formal number 3 uh, reserve driver uh,
right.
at a minimum. But you never know. I mean, if he crushes it the rest of the season, both those seats are open, and we'll get to this a little bit later. But I feel like Daniel Ricciardo is just not really anywhere. I don't think the team is doing that well, but I don't think Ricciardo is doing particularly well either. And I think my feeling is that seat's open, but who knows? And it's also cool that you see someone like Ollie Behrman come in and score a point in a Haas where he is going next year, and it makes you feel good for that team that they like picked someone and it's working out for them, and it's not just they're like trying so hard to break out of this cycle of just like having these drivers come in and crash up the cars, and every weekend like they either crash up the car or end up at the back. And it really, again, it just takes me back to like realizing how good Formula One is when it's really good, because like even though they're not racing for wins, there's all these like midfield teams and back marker teams that are still kind of like racing around each other. And it's getting, other than Kick Sauber, who's just a tractor, it's getting really close amongst most of the teams in their, Formula A, B, and C areas, and it's very cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, I do have to apologize to Franco because when he crashed in FP1, I think it was, I was a little bit like, oh man, James, like you get rid of Logan for a rookie who's never even been in an F1 car, and he first thing he does is put it into the wall, and you know you deserve this. And then the kid comes out and absolutely performs and crushes it. So, I know there's some tricky conditions. It just rained, and Azerbaijan is a tricky track for people who haven't driven it very much. But yeah, so apologies to him. But yeah, I'm excited that we're getting a lot of these new young drivers, like you said. When I used to race motocross when I was younger, you would go to um, the supercrosses or motocrosses, and they would always like do the feeder races before, like they do in F1. And the amateur guys, like the intermediate guys who were like one step below, were always way more fun to watch because they were driving like they had nothing to lose. because they're trying to prove themselves. They're trying to make a mark. And like you said, that's what Franco was doing. And I think it really shows. And I'm excited to see where these kids come up, because they're going to make some of these complacent guys look awful. and I'm excited to see what happens there.
I know this is never going to happen, but my hope is that someone at Aston Martin is like, yeah, maybe we should just get rid of Lance Stroll.
I mean,
I know the answer to that question, but I'm just saying it out loud for vibes.
I mean, I think the only way that happens is if Max wants to go over there, and even if even if that's the case, I still think they get rid of Alonso over Stroll, because ultimately,
yeah, I mean that's the thing, and I was listening to another podcast and they were talking about this because a lot of people, you know, were saying that, and I know those rumors were floating around. The issue is if the ultimate goal is to make Lance Stroll a world champion, at least for Fernando Alonso, he's like the older guy who is kind of mentoring Lance. And like, yes, he's doing way better than Lance, but he is old and he's not going to be there forever, right? Like, he is kind of that old guard person. If you put Max in that seat, like, Lance is never, ever, ever, ever winning over Max. Like, that's just not going to happen. And so I don't know what, like, I guess I don't know what that buys them. You know, I mean, it's great financially for them, but I just don't know like what then the mission is.
well, Lawrence, I'm going to make a little message here to you. You inspire me. You're the greatest dad on the planet Earth. No one is in competition of you. However, I don't think it's going to happen, buddy. But in order for Aston to put Lance in a WDC, they would have to have an RB19 level car, everybody else having a terrible car, and for there to be team orders every single race. And like look, we're looking at someone like Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc, all these guys. These guys are top tier talents and they're in good cars. Lando is in a great car, and it's still difficult to win a championship. So you have to be winning consistently, not making mistakes. And winning championships is just hard. You have to, the car has to be good, your reliability has to be good, and you have to not make mistakes. You have to be good through quality. Like, everything has to be good and just kind of align up. So uh, I think if you have the opportunity to get Max, you take Max, and you know you say, "Sorry, son, let's go race some WEC together, and you can win the championship there." But uh, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. I'm super curious. Obviously, we haven't talked about this Adrian situation yet, but we can talk about it now. But it's very clear that he doesn't start until March of next year, so I don't think he's going to be working on 2025 at all. Probably another write off year and focus on 2026, new regulations, new car, new design. And they want to have Adrian build them a car that's, 3 steps ahead of every other car right out of the gate, which I think is their ultimate plan. So, but, I think we've talked about a little bit this offline, but I'm a little sad to see Adrian go to Aston Martin. I don't know why. I just am.
I mean, I think you know in your heart why, which is what we just talked about. But yeah, I mean, I think it'll be really cool to see purely from like a sporting perspective and from a challenge perspective, and I think that's part of why he's doing it. I mean, obviously there's ownership in the team, which is huge. I'm sure he's getting a huge salary, which is amazing. He doesn't have to move, which is awesome. But I think a part of it is like, can he, it's like a challenge to himself. Like, can he, uh, can he can he really like build up a team um, in that way? And I think the answer is yes. It sucks that they won't have two drivers that can really capitalize on it, but you never know. I mean, the car could be like Lance has had good races. He's just terribly inconsistent, and he is probably like the least aware Formula One driver. Outside of oh my god, what is his name? The Russian who kept crashing. I'm just blanking because he's
Mazepin?
Mazepin. Yeah, I mean
Mazepin?
he's just so unaware of like how to race and when to race and when a move is on and when it isn't, and so just like not aware whatsoever. But he has had races where even a lot of last year and the year before, um he would like be in the points in races where you'd never hear about him, and then after you'd look at the standings and you're like, wait, what? Lance came in 10th, or Lance came in like 8th or ninth, and you're like, where was he the entire time?
Right.
And he's just kind of there, and I always felt like he is the most like 50-50 bland driver, which is kind of fun because it really does it like gives you the barometer of when the car is good and when the car isn't, because like he's just such a bland driver that if the car is great, then he'll do good, and if the car is terrible, he'll do terribly. So he's like a funny barometer for a car, which maybe why Adrian Newey wants to do it. So who knows?
I mean, that's true. The one thing that I will give Lance is that I think he is a capable technical driver. Like, I think he's capable of taking an F1 car around the track and hitting apexes and stuff like that. I don't think he's, on the level of some of the other guys. But like you said, his awareness and like, I think like, just like you talked about Valtteri a long time ago, like his racecraft is just not there. So anytime he has to drive outside like of the norm, like, on his own in a bubble, in a vacuum, then I think that's where his decision making, falls apart. Like when him and Valtteri clashed at Imola. Um, I just think, but if you give him a car and he's qualifying P1, and he doesn't have to do anything but race around the track in first place, maybe we'll see. But I'll actually be really, if he ever has a car that's that good, I'll be really curious to see what happens the first time he has to like pass people with blue flags. Maybe he crashes himself out of the first place.
It will be interesting for sure.
Isn't that what happened with Max and Ocon, which led to the punch?
Yeah.
That would be really interesting. But yeah, so I want to get into this Ricardo a bit. So let's talk about winners and losers. Like, obviously, winners. I think we're both going to have Piastri. I mean, this
How
kid
can
had. What was that?
I said, how can you not?
Yeah, I mean, he's very quickly becoming my favorite driver on the grid. Nobody ever replaced Valtteri for me, but he's just so level-headed for his age and experience. He seems to have that fighter spirit. I mean, we saw him take it, on the edge with Lando in Monza. The racecraft here, passing Leclerc, and the defenses that he had over multiple laps against Leclerc. This kid is obviously here to win, and we saw he's won. Another one of those kids that's won every championship that he's been in the first year. So we kind of knew that was going to be him going in, but he seems to be just so good, and I'm super excited to see how he shapes up next year, and like where he is in relative to Norris. But he drove an amazing race. I think this kid is the real deal, and once Mac leaves the sport, I think it's going to be Piastri's world. But this is my vote for him.
I don't disagree. I am also a huge Piastri fan, and I love how level-headed he is, and I hope he remains so, like, even with his win on the radio, he was just like, "Yep, that was really good. Thanks." Like, team was a huge help. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Like, he wasn't, like, he's even in an excited state. He didn't seem that, like that. Not that he like wasn't excited, but he just seemed so calm and collected. It was cool, and that's and also what I find interesting is I think that he's very calm and collected, like outside of his head, but like given his run of form, I think he is more ruthless behind the scenes, which is cool because you don't see that a lot. Like, a lot of these guys wear their emotions on their sleeves, and like a ruthless person you see is ruthless. And someone who is less so, you see, like someone like Leclerc. He's a great driver. I don't think he's as ruthless as he needs to be, and he also like he is that way all the time. Whereas Piastri, I feel like there's a lot of heat behind that, and he kind of like has these strikes when he needs to. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone wears their emotions on their sleeve, they're going to be more exploitable. If you know how to get under someone's skin, you're going to exploit that. And I think Oscar, like you said, I don't think Oscar is not excited, or I don't think he is not aggressive. He's just, keeping it to himself and just getting the job done on track. And that's what I like about him. And then, we both have, Mr. Colapinto, like you said, 2 races in, 4 times the point as Logan, and I think he's there to perform. He got a nod from Lewis, and that made his day. We talked a lot about that, so I think these rookies are showing up and having a good, showing up well, and just hats off to him for doing a good job and making a good first impression. If I'm one, I'm gonna definitely be excited to watch his career.
Yeah. And shout out to the Bear, who, it's one thing to score some points in a Ferrari on your debut. It's another to score a point in a Haas on your debut. So not too shabby.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're having Haas is slowly making a little bit of grounds and being able to perform well. I don't really know about Alpine. We haven't really talked about them that much in the last few episodes. They've kind of been kind of nowhere, but they definitely seem to be better than they were at the start of the season. The only real tractor left is Kick Sauber from like a total dead car standpoint. And if Mattia and team are able to turn that around with Audi, we might have like really good fights at the top, really good fights in the middle, and even some good fights in the back. And then if they do implement this new point system that they're talking about, could make for some very interesting races over the next few seasons. So, like you said, F1's in a really good spot right now. But let's talk about losers. And you brought them up earlier. I think both have Daniel Ricciardo on here. Guy has been in Nowheresville, but I'm curious. I heard this somewhere. I think I read it on Reddit somewhere, whatever. But someone said that the team just forget about him because he did 50. He did 49 laps on hards and pit like right at the end for softs. Like,
I was looking at this chart that you put on the sheet, and I almost wasn't sure that it was correct.
yeah, I mean, I read about it, but we've seen this before. There was that race where Alex Albon did 50 laps or what, I can't remember how many. I think it was Australia, I can't remember, but where he did the whole race on hards, except, or I think it was inters actually, until the last lap. No, it had to have been hards because otherwise he wouldn't even have had to pit for inters. But I wish I had more time, because if I had more time with everyone TV, I kind of want to go back and watch the whole race just from Ricardo's perspective and listen to his radio. See if he's like, do you ever watch the movie Days of Thunder where he's like, Tom Cruise is talking to the pit wall and they're like, hey, we're eating ice cream, leave us alone. Like, I almost feel like RB's like, they went out for lunch and they were like, oh crap, after Tsunoda retired the car, they were just like, oh, we're done.
Yuki's out, and they're like, oh, whoops. We forgot our other kid at the race.
Yeah. So, yeah, like it's so weird. It's so polarizing to see this Danny Rick transition. I mean, Cheyenne and I have talked a lot about this. I think you and I have talked a lot about this. Just this guy went from the potential future of F1 to struggling really hard, having multiple comeback stories, and now it seems like the sport, the fans, the teams, everybody's just kind of forgotten about this guy, and it's kind of really sad to because I really liked him. Um, yeah, I don't really have much more to say about it other than like obviously I think his time in F1 is finally coming to an official end. It'll either be Liam Lawson or crazier things have happened for the Franco Colapintos. Obviously, there's a couple other people in the Red Bull system, junior drivers, a couple of drivers in F2 that drive for them. So we'll see what happens, but I don't think it's going to be Danny Rick next year.
Yeah, I agree. And you had said this to me, but I think he is kind of, and it's really sad to even say this, almost as much as it was sad to say is he finished in F1 in general, but he just feels like he lost some of that shine of being happy. And like, even if he wasn't winning races or fighting for podiums, he was always like, having this huge smile on his face and kind of, he basically became the face of F1 at one point. And now he just, like he's obviously having a hard time, in sort of in his comeback era, and it just isn't working out. And I'm sure it's super, super tough on him. Um, but I think just generally, and I've always kind of thought this about him because I like him as a person, but I just think he's not consistent enough to really be at the top, at least where he thinks he should be. So it's just tough to see, especially like the last few weekends where you really don't see him at all. Like you don't see him, uh, you know, really doing those fun interviews that he used to do. You don't really see him on track anywhere. He's not really highlighted anywhere. He kind of just is there driving around, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I want to retract my statement from a few seconds ago. Uh, I I said I felt sorry for him, I think, and that it was a little sad. I retract that because I forgot that he was paid 15 million last year to not drive for anybody for half a season, and he's an F1 winner and a good-looking guy, so I'm sure he'll be fine.
Yep.
But
Good point.
I,
Feeling bad for feeling bad
I,
for a Formula One driver is
I,
always a tough road to go down.
I just I was like, oh man, yeah, I was like, man, I would love to be paid 50 million to not work, but yeah, uh, I also have Red Bull on there just because they lost the top spot in the constructor championship, um, which at the beginning of the season, not only do we not think that Max could not potentially win, but that RB was a guaranteed lock for constructors, and they've really just kind of fallen apart. They're 20 points behind McLaren. Ferrari is within striking distance too. It's very possible that Red Bull could get third in constructors, and um, yeah, I don't know what their ultimate long term future looks like, but I think we might see a little bit of a Red Bull, recession for the next few seasons, especially with, if I don't even know if the Ford deal is still going through, but if it is, we have no idea how that's going to work out. Um,
Yeah, I had Verstappen in my losers column, which I still think I would go with, but I feel like I want to switch it to Red Bull in general for everything that you just talked about. And what's really interesting to me is it really highlights how strong Mercedes was for the amount of time that they were. Like 8 constructors titles in a row is absolutely mind-boggling when Red Bull, and other teams have had a good series of stretches of wins, but like to be that strong, that consistent for that long is absolutely crazy, and I think this situation highlights that really well. And yeah, I mean, I think they lost Nui, fine, and they're losing a couple other people, fine, but like you really have to get your shit together and like fill those gaps as much as possible. And it really just feels like all the drama within that team is sucking the life out of them, and there's no stoppage of blood loss. It just feels like they're, spiraling downward, and it's crappy because I love them as a team generally, but it really feels like they don't have direction. They don't know how to support each other in the right way. It feels very strange to like have more than a few off weekends, but really see like the team and the cars suffer because of it.
Yeah, I mean, Shyam and I talked a lot about this last episode where, if you work at the best company in the world, like let's say you worked at Microsoft in the early Bill Gates era, and everyone was just making, like, every executive was making bukus of money. The culture at the office was great. Like, Red Bull was like that. Like, the culture was great. They had Nui, they had Max, like everything was going. They had the best pit crew in the world. Then all of a sudden this drama happens, these these accusations, and then like the turmoil between Jos Verstappen and Horner, and then all this stuff that's going on, and then Nui leaves. If you're like in this team that's been such a well-oiled machine for so long, and I'm sure they all worked really hard, but they saw results from it, the morale is going to come down. Everything is going to come down. And then all of a sudden you see the effects of that morale and the effects of the departures. Like, all of a sudden, just like Zach Brown was talking about, like, resumes start flying around. And if resumes are flying around, they're going to have some brain drain, and then morale is going to continue to go down, and then everyone's going to work a little bit less hard, and it's just going to spiral. But ultimately, I do think that that's natural for a team. We're seeing it happened a little bit with Mercedes as well. They lost a couple of important key people. Once you're at the top of your game for so long, all those people who, not everyone can be Toto, right? So everyone who's been at Mercedes for 8 years and won 8 championships has an amazing resume, and they want to make more money and they want to get promoted. And so they go to other teams to go, do what James Vowles did, like go from being who he was to a team principal. So ultimately, I think it's natural, but it's just been such a quick demise for Red Bull. It's a little jarring, I think, for everybody, especially the hyper fans, because we thought we were just starting the 8 championship run of Red Bull, and now it's like looking like it's already gone. So we'll see. And then for my hot seat, I had difficulty, and I know you did too. But I'm going to put Bottas in my hot seat just because he seems to be fighting for his seat. And in my opinion, there's only one seat left for him, and that's the one he's currently in. And, you got guys like Colapinto coming in and making a big statement, and then James Vowles publicly saying that he would work with Audi to secure him a seat if they asked. And so I know it's a little hard for Bottas to do anything in that car, but something has to he has to do something to stay in F1, and I'll be really sad, obviously, but I think he's on the verge of getting the boot.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. And this one was a tough one for me, and honestly, I still don't know who's in my hot seat, like other than I guess Red Bull as a team. But yeah, I mean, I think Bottas. It's hard because the car isn't good, like you said, and it's so bad that it's hard to determine when someone is doing well at all, because you can only judge against their teammate, um, which usually he has done quite a bit better than Joe, but I don't know. This one was a tough one to find a hot seat driver, just because I felt like for the most part everyone did as good of a job as possible, and I would love to say Lance Stroll would be in my hot seat, but he's not going anywhere, so that's
Well,
that's that. But I'll put
let's
him in
just,
the hot seat.
you know what? Let's just throw the entire grid into the hot seat because Magnussen's coming back with 0 penalty points, and that guy's on a mission to crash some cars next week.
Oh my god.
Could you imagine this? You have 0 penalty points, and you're guaranteed to not have a seat next year.
Does it actually so it doesn't even
Yeah,
it fully resets?
it fully resets, baby.
That makes no sense, and it's going to be that coupled with now how close everyone is on the grid. It is going to be a bonkers end to the season.
Magnussen is going to pull a Gotifi in Abu Dhabi. Just wait.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised, and it for it to actually be on purpose, and he'll just get out of the car and be like, "Yep, I wanted Lando to win, so I just crashed Max out."
Yeah, I mean, off topic a little bit, but I was looking at Vegas ticket prices today just because the championship is so close that I think it's going to be decided either in Vegas, Qatar, or Abu Dhabi. And so because I've already been to Dakota, I was like, oh man, it would be nice to go to Vegas at least once. But the ticket prices are just so insane. But it's actually kind of crazy. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised too if Magnussen. But I want to see it happen if possible. But
Yeah. Of course.
So next week we have Singapore, which we talked about earlier was an awful race for Red Bull. And I think I don't know if it'll be as awful, but I do think podium is probably out of the picture for them. And my prediction for next week is I'm actually going to put a Charles Leclerc on the top step. I think the track's going to suit Ferrari maybe a little bit better than McLaren. And but then I'm going to put the papayas in 2 and 3.
I want to say Papaya's 1 and 2. I think it'll be Lando, Piastri, and then one of the Ferraris. I think it could be Sainz just because he did really well last year.
Yeah, I wouldn't put anything past Sainz, and obviously he has nothing to lose at Ferrari either. So honestly, I think it could go any shuffled way of those. But I think I don't know if you've seen this scrutiny around McLaren's rear wing fiasco. Have you seen that?
I have, and I can't tell. So basically what I've been reading is that it's been tested and it isn't outside of the regulations, but I don't know if that has changed, but it seems like people are aware of it and it's been fine so far.
Yeah, I mean it's very possible. I just think that whatever they're doing is giving them maybe a lot more advantage in longer high speed straights, and Singapore is very tight and twisty and turny. So um, I'm just going to give a slight advantage to the Ferraris, but like you said, anything could happen. I think it's going to be a great race. We're going to get maybe our first full safety car red flag back into the mix. We'll see, but a little disappointed that we're going to have a month break right after that. But then right into Austin and into the championship, a few races. But like you said, and we said all episode, Formula One is at the best of the best again, and it's going to be so exciting to watch. So appreciate you coming back on. As always, we've missed Cheyenne very dearly, but business trips are business trips, and but yeah, thanks.
Happy to come on whenever I can.
Of course. We'll see you guys next week. Thank you for listening. Cheyenne and I would love for you to join the Fan Team Radio community. So please like, subscribe, or follow on your platform of choice, and we'll see you next time.